I always feel a little silly talking about any language related plans or goals or projects that I might have, just because at this stage of my life, there's nothing really that ties me to those goals. And what I mean by that is that language learning right now is purely a hobby for me. I do not need to learn any of my languages for school, for work, for moving, at least not yet. So all of my goals are always self-imposed and therefore very easy to bail on. Which is why, although I am making a list of things I would like to see myself achieve next year, I also fully acknowledge that what my aspirations and goals and priorities will look like in a couple of months might be very, very different. There is, however, one overarching principle that I would like to implement in my life next year, and that is something that is very heavily inspired by a blog post that I found on a website called Raptitude.com. And the article itself was called Go Deeper, Not Wider. And in it, the author basically suggests that for 1 year, we avoid starting new projects, that we focus on what we already have instead of acquiring more, and that we make the most of our current possessions. We read books we own, we practice instruments that we can already play, and we complete courses that we have started. And then finally, that we try to improve existing skills rather than learning new ones. I think you guys can probably already tell by just how many languages I have been attempting to learn, but I have pretty bad impulse control. And that can be said not just about language learning, but also about many other areas of my life. For example, shopping is something like that, especially when buying new things is connected to my aspirations. So for example, if I'm starting to learn a new language, I might go and purchase a lot of different books, resources, even like notebooks to take notes in, because I feel like buying all those things gives me the sort of instant gratification learning a language cannot give you, because learning a language is a long process, you know. The same can be said for a lot of other things. Like there's definitely quite a lot of hobbies like drawing, knitting, crocheting that I have attempted, and although I don't have a huge number of things like materials or tools for those hobbies, I definitely have more than I need, given that a lot of those hobbies I don't even touch them anymore. And as a result, I often feel like I spread myself too thin, get overwhelmed too quickly, and then end up not achieving any of my sort of goals or aspirations. And in that blog post, the year where you're supposed to go deeper and not wider is called the year of depth. So technically for me, what would that look like? What I would like to do personally is to not start learning any new languages and focus not just on the languages that I have already started learning, but only on a couple of them. Another one, and this is not related to language learning per se, is no new craft related hobbies. I started making collages a couple of months ago, and I would like to continue doing that, but I do not want to be tempted by other hobbies, be it knitting, drawing, or anything like that. I also want to read more books than I buy. I have a big problem where not only do I buy a lot of books, because I feel like that on its own is not a big problem, since I would say 90% of the books that I get, I do get them secondhand and usually for extremely cheap. My problem is that there's very little overlap between the books that I own and the books that I read. I buy a lot of books and then I end up reading books that I get from the library or books that I buy digitally. And so the vast majority of the books that I own, I actually have not read. And so this year, I would like to change that. And I'm thinking of maybe allowing myself to buy one book for every 3 books that I finish. And then another one is not buying any new stationery until I use up what I already have. But since this is a language learning channel, I do not know how much you guys want me to talk about other hobbies or things that I'm interested in. So let's focus on the languages. If I actually trusted myself to stick to the goals that I set in January for the whole year, which I, to be completely honest, don't, I would like to focus only on 2 languages next year, which are Italian and German. So for Italian, I have already mentioned this in my previous video, but I really, really want my production skills to get closer to my comprehension. And when I say production, so I should specify that I think sometimes people have this problem where they have trouble like speaking the language or writing the language compared to, let's say, reading or listening. And that is mostly because they haven't really practiced speaking or writing as much as they have practiced other skills. In my case, it is not just that. In my case, what is holding me down, or at least that's what I feel, is the lack of grammar knowledge. It's not that I don't have experience like of speaking because I haven't spoken enough. It is that I do not have like any rules, grammar rules in my head to fall back on. I had like a somewhat of similar situation with Spanish, but it was also not similar because I had studied Spanish for a couple of years before I actually got a chance to start speaking Spanish. And when I did start speaking, it was actually quite painless, even though I was making a lot of mistakes. But what I needed to do is just to get used to actually speaking the language. With Italian, it's not about the lack of speaking practice. It is the lack of sort of knowledge of how the language works, of what rules to use. And I know some people kind of feel very opposed to learning grammar, but for me, honestly, I've tried not doing it. I also am not someone who's just like learning grammar for fun, but I do feel like if I don't have that foundation, I have nothing to fall back on. I also still want to continue reading in this language, although not as intensively as I currently am, because currently I am doing this challenge where I am reading in Italian every day for 100 days in a row, basically. But maybe something like 10 books throughout the whole year of 2025 would be pretty good, because I do own quite a lot of Italian books, thanks to Goodwill and that one estate sale that my husband and I really lucked out at. Another thing I would like to work more on is just kind of more natural pronunciation and intonation, because I sometimes feel like I rely too much on my Spanish pronunciation skills when I speak Italian, and though there definitely is an overlap, there's also quite a lot of maybe more subtle but differences nevertheless. So I feel like because the majority of the time that I've been spending on Italian has been reading time, I haven't really been exposing myself to as much of spoken Italian as I probably should be. And that is also something that I would like to work on next year. I don't really have like a set plan for now, but I think something that I would want to be doing is just, again, listening more, probably potentially doing shadowing. I really like doing shadowing whenever I remember that it actually exists as a method. And then another thing is that there's this one book that I've been eyeing for a couple of years now, specifically about Italian pronunciation, I think, or phonetics or something like that. But here I should probably be a little more mindful because, again, year of depth, not buying new books, not starting new resources. And yeah, I'm not sure if buying Italian pronunciation textbook would actually fit into the concept. And then German. For German, I have somewhat an ambitious goal. I have already mentioned in my previous videos how in 2022 I started doing these 99 or 100 day challenges when I focus on one language or on a specific skill, like reading in that particular language. And then I do it for what basically is the last 99 or the last 100 days of the year. So in 2022, I did 100 days of Polish. In 2023, I did 100 days of reading in Spanish, 99 days of reading in Spanish. I started one day later. And then in 2024, I'm still doing 100 days of reading in Italian. So in 2025, I would love to do 100 days of reading in German. But in order for me to do that, I would have to be at least at a confident B1, if not B2. I think B2 would be ideal because I don't just want to be reading consistently in a language, I also want to be reading things that I like. And a lot of things that are considered to be easier, like for example middle grade literature, YA, maybe something like romance, is not really genres that I'm super interested in. And so unfortunately, if I am to start, going through like classics or modern classics or like contemporary literary fiction that would require quite a high level in the language. And so that basically means that I would have to work really hard on a lot of skills, especially probably on vocabulary, because I find that one to be probably the most essential when it comes to reading. But I also want to avoid repeating the situation I'm in with Italian right now. So even though reading is always my number one priority, I still want to work on other skills, particularly on grammar, writing, maybe speaking. But I also have a backup plan, just because I'm not 100% sure that I will even care about these goals that I'm setting right now a couple of months from now. And I think my biggest challenge so far is not even like having a study routine or studying consistently or anything like that. My main problem is kind of not being able to tell myself, look, for the next at least 6 months, you're focusing on this and this language. Nothing else. So ideally that actually should be my goal, which I think it is, kind of again connected to this like whole year of depth thing, right? But just in case I stop for some reason caring temporarily, because usually it is temporarily, caring about one of these languages that I have just talked about, namely German and Italian, I will allow myself to switch to Polish, because I know that if ideally I were to stick with Italian and German, my next target language would be Polish. So if for some reason I don't feel like having German or Italian as a priority anymore, I am allowed to replace one of these two languages with Polish. But at the same time, I do want to say that if I just want to drop a language, like if for some reason I get so much into German that I would be like, you know what, I just want to focus on German and nothing else, that is perfectly fine. So I kind of want to allow myself to focus on one language, 2 as a maximum, but not more than that. And I think that's pretty much it in terms of languages. If you want to let me know what you are planning to do with your languages in 2025, or any other plans that you might have, anything exciting, please do share. Again, thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one, if there is a next one. I am planning one, so hopefully. Anyways, bye bye.